face. Girls, guys, same point applies. So we're talking a little bit about how do you find a good wife? Well, things have changed a little bit from those days, but in those days, Abraham decided he was going to send back home for a wife. Makes sense. He at least knows the family traditions of his cousins back in Mesopotamia, what we call Iraq these days, somewhere in there between the two rivers. That's where Abraham's going. But he can't go himself because he's too old. So he picks a servant and he says, listen, I want you to promise me right now, you're the steward of my estate. If I die before you come back, you can do whatever you want. So promise me, swear you will not let my son marry one of these women who worships pagan gods. They might be pretty, but they'll destroy him. Not because they're bad themselves, but because their culture was very twisted. Some of these pagan religions sacrificed babies to their god to make sure the crops would grow. So, not okay. So, Abraham's servant promises. And he takes a whole camel train across the desert back to where Abraham came from. And he gets to the city where he knows Abraham's relatives live, and he says a little prayer. He says, God, you do what you want, but I'm asking you to do this. I'm going to go to the well, and there will be, I know, the young women coming carrying water. I'm going to test their character. So I'm going to ask one of them for water for myself, because that will show that she knows how to be hospitable, how to take care of strangers. That's important. This is a virtue. And then, if she also says, let me get water for your camels too, then I'll know that this is the young woman I'm supposed to bring back for my son. Okay? Or for my master's son. So he goes in, and the way that the Bible story tells it is very much repetitious, because he tells God he's going to do this, and then he says exactly the same words. There's a young woman who comes. Anyone know what her name is? Anyone else? Bravo. Rebecca. You have an aunt, Rebecca, so, and you read the Bible. Bravo. So, Rebecca comes. She's carrying her water pot, maybe on her shoulder, maybe on her head. I don't know. Can you imagine a girl carrying a water pot on her head? It was the thing those days. I don't know what they wear now, but back then they were wearing water pots. And he goes and he says, I need water. I've just come across the desert. And she says, absolutely, and let me draw water for your camels too. He says, okay. Whoever said God didn't answer prayers? Wow. So he lets her draw the water, and then he says, who is your father? And she tells him. And he says, and who is his father? And she tells him. And he says, wow, that's my master Abraham's nephew, that is your grandfather. So they're related. Not too closely related, they can't get married, but related. So he knows he found a girl of good family, a girl of good virtues, not just because of her blood or her language or her name, but because when she had no idea that she was being put to the test, she was hospitable. She cared for the stranger. Question? Maybe, but we're not going to get into that. So here's the point. Yes, they had made an arrangement. He took her back across the desert. She married his master Isaac. She became the mother of Jacob and Esau. We'll talk about them later. Her name was Rebecca, and she was a good and a pious woman. But here's the point. When you get old enough to start looking for someone to marry, don't just look for the pretty face. Look for the person that is virtuous. Look for the person that cares for those who are weak, who they don't have to take care of otherwise. This is the point. Because this way, you know they're not just selfish. They know how to give. And you shouldn't marry them because that means they'll give to you. That's not the point. You marry them because you will together give to everyone who is in need. Which brings us back to what day this is, the last day before Lent starts, because this is one of the primary virtues of the Christian. We give to those who are in need. So, with all that in mind, forgive the complexity. Let's stand up and take communion.